Well, I hope that you are doing well today. I hope the week has been good to you so far. If not, I hope the rest of the week will be better for you. I want to go ahead and jump in, but before we do, let's be mindful of the ones that are on our hearts and our minds. Let's be lifting their names up before our Father in heaven. Um, let's reach out to the individuals that we know that are sick or hurting in any way and let them know that we love them. Let them know that we're praying for them. As always, if we can do anything for you, we ask that you just ask us. We are nearing the end of the life of Abraham, and we will be shortly talking about the life of Isaac. Genesis chapter 23, right? This was, or Genesis chapter 24, sorry. That was the really long chapter. The longest chapter, at least, that we've encountered so far. It told us all about how Abraham's most trusted servant was able to find a wife from Isaac. Remember, Abraham, the integrity of Abraham's line had to be preserved. That is to say, that Isaac's wife needed to come from the line of Terah, so that required Abraham's servant to go back to the land of Haran and to find a wife from Haran. Remember, Abraham explicitly said, do not, under any circumstance, let Isaac travel back to Haran. In fact, if a woman is not willing to follow you back from Haran, Abraham tells his servant, you're released from the oath that you have taken before me. So we're going to move into Genesis chapter 25 now. We read, remember, Sarah's dead at this point. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah, and then she bore all these children. And we jump down to verse 5. Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. Now, this is no coincidence, right? We knew this was going to happen. Isaac was the child of promise that was said that it was said was going to come from the barren Sarah at the time. God intervened, gave Abraham and Sarah a child, and he said, this is the child of promise. This is your heir. Remember, it seems that Abraham and Sarah had an adopted heir, and then after that you had Ishmael, and Abraham thought he was going to be his heir, his primary heir at least, but then Isaac comes along. So we see that Abraham now is giving all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts. Now, this is pretty gracious on the part of Abraham, because you might have heard of the ancient law code, the Code of Hammurabi, right? And in the Code of Hammurabi, it says that sons of concubines that weren't acknowledged by their father to be on the same level as the primary heir, they went away with nothing. But we see here that Abraham's giving gifts, so he obviously has a relationship in some type of way with these children, or at least thinks highly of them. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. Now, what is this business? Well, although it seems that Abraham seemed to look favorably upon these children, they were not, like we've said time and time again, the child of promise. The land of Canaan belonged to Isaac, right? He was going to inherit the promises that God made to Abraham personally. Abraham didn't want these children to interfere with Isaac's right to the land. It's better just to send them away so that they don't cause Isaac any pain or any grief, especially any conflict. So he sends them away, but like we said, he's pretty gracious because he doesn't send them away empty-handed. Well, then we read this bit of information. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, and an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah, his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his Isaac, his son. So we read, it's time for Abraham to die. Abraham died knowing that he had pleased God. The fact that Abraham died in a good old age and that he died in peace witnesses to the fact that God indeed blessed Abraham as he said that he would. Now, there is a phrase, though, here in verse, let me get back to it, I lost my place, in verse 8 that's a bit odd. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years. That's not all that peculiar. What is peculiar is this last statement, and was gathered to his people. That phrase, that signifying that he departed and became, we might say, numbered among his ancestors. That phrase is only used 10 times in the Pentateuch. Now, when we talk about the Pentateuch, we're talking about Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? So in those books, this phrase is only used 10 times. That's not a lot at all. What exactly does this phrase mean? Who knows? It seems that it might possibly hint at the idea of an afterlife. Now, you may be thinking, well, of course there is an afterlife. Why would you even bring up the fact that it might be possibly hinting at an afterlife? Well, this idea that we have of when a person dies, they either go to heaven or they go to hell, that's a New Testament reality. You're going to have to read that into the Old Testament because the Old Testament doesn't make that very explicit to us. We do know when we read, like when we read the book of Job, we talked a little bit about the Hadean realm. They had ideas about what happens after death, but as far as like what all that entails, nobody really seemed to have a good idea. So maybe this is giving us some evidence, but regardless of that, let's not go down that rabbit hole. Notice that Isaac and Ishmael were at odds with each other a bit. Remember that Sarah had sent them off because she was afraid that that Ishmael was going to stand in the way of Isaac's prosperity, that possibly he was going to stand against him, so she sends them away. So their relationship isn't that great, but notice that they're willing to put their differences aside in order to bury their dead father. And notice they bury Abraham in the same place that Sarah was buried. Remember, when Sarah died, Abraham really needed a place to bury her, but he wanted to own the rights to the place that he buried Sarah. So he goes to Hebron, and Hebron was governed by the Hittites at the time, and Abraham offers to pay whatever it takes in order to bury Sarah, and some of them, the Hittites offer him any of their land, but they seem to be unwilling to let Abraham own the rights to the land, and Abraham really doesn't take no for an answer, and eventually he's able to buy from Ephron the field and the cave of Machpelah, where he's able to lay Sarah to rest. So Abraham now is buried there as well. We're not going to read the rest of that. We're going to jump down to, let's go to verse 19. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah. So these are the generations. Remember when we first started talking about the book of Genesis, we talked about the Toledot formula, the account of, we might say. That's usually how that's translated sometimes. Well, it's typical for the former leader to head the material that pertains to the next leader. So here we go. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. He's the former leader, of course, he's talked about before we get into talking about Isaac. But we read about Rebekah. I think it's interesting, though, that notice when Rebekah is described, she's the daughter of Bethuel, but it's also said that she's the sister of Laban. Why bring Laban into the equation? Well, I think this is just foreshadowing to us that Laban is going to play a significant role in the life of Jacob. We know that's true. We've read the book of Genesis before. So I think that's why he's mentioned. Verse 21, and Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Notice before when we heard about Rebekah, Rebekah was said to have been very beautiful. Well, Sarah was also said to have been very beautiful. Sarah was also said to have been barren, right? That caused some problems because they wanted a child. Abraham and Sarah did. Well, notice now Isaac's wife that is beautiful is also barren, and it takes an intervention. It takes an act of God, we might say, in order for both Sarah and Rebekah to conceive. It's pretty significant. I think we should note that theme as we see it throughout the book of Genesis. Now, God, we see, is now doing for Isaac what he did for his father Abraham. So let's read verse 22. The children struggled together within her and she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? Well, this idea that the children in her belly are struggling against one another sort of carries the idea that they're jostling one another. That is, they're crushing one another in her womb. This, no doubt, is causing her emotional pain. It's also very much causing her physical pain. And usually when people suffer physically, they want to know why in the world God is allowing this to happen to them out of all people. Well, she asks sort of a similar question. So in order to find the answer, it says, so she went to inquire of the Lord. Well, what exactly does that mean, that she went to inquire of the Lord? Did she go to a priest? Did she go to a prophet? Did she go to a well by herself where God might speak to her? Who knows? We do know that God does in fact speak to her, because it says, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. Well, that's a bit different, right? Because usually the firstborn is the leader after the father dies. That is the leader of the tribe, the head of the family. The younger son isn't the leader. He's not the firstborn. But there seems to be a reversal of fortune here. So we get to verses 24 through 26. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. This is a bit unusual. The child came out hairy, but he also came out red. Well, this word for red in Hebrew really, I think, sort of refers to an orange brownish color, or maybe it refers to a yellowish brown color. Do with that what you wish. I just thought that was a pretty interesting detail. But notice that the detail about Jacob, right? Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. No doubt this is symbolic of the strife and contention that is going to be between the two. So they called his name Yaakov, Jacob, the one who grabs a heel, or the one who clings to a heel. So verses 27 through 28, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. So Esau was an outdoorsman, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Jacob seemed to be very reserved. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. I think this just witnesses to the fact that parents usually gravitate toward the child that has the same interests that they do. Isaac seemed to love the outdoors, so he gravitated more toward Esau. Rebecca, being a woman at this time, would have been reserved and lived a quiet life, I think it's fair to say. So she would have gravitated more toward Jacob, right? Their interests seem to have aligned more. Verses 29 through 31, once when Jacob was cooking stew, so this is the good stuff, right? This is where it starts to get interesting. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. So there's a word play here, right? That's why the text tells us, therefore his name was called Edom. But notice, Esau seems to live a pretty dramatic life, but no doubt this is the episode that is at the heart of the rivalry between the two siblings, the rivalry that God said was, that God told Rebekah was going to exist, right? Well, how did all that come about? Well, Jacob saw an opportunity to take advantage of the situation, right? My brother has went out, he's hunted all day, he's tired, he's extremely hungry, so hungry that he thinks that he's going to die. How can I manipulate this situation to my advantage? Well, Jacob is cooking some stew that seems to look good to Esau. So Jacob said, "Hey, sell me your birthright now." Now, we might think Esau should have thought, "What? No way." He should have valued his birthright a lot more. But notice what Jacob thought. He thought that that being Esau, would desire something more tangible than abstract in the moment. Now, we as humans, we can, blame Esau all we want. We can say we would never have done that. We as humans do this all the time, right? People that invest money, when they finally see that their investment is growing, what do a lot of people want to do? They want to cash out the money, don't they? They want to get the money in their hand instead of waiting and letting that money continue to grow. Why? Because people in the moment love things that are tangible. They love things that they can hold on to, that they can grab. They don't like things that are abstract in the moment. They don't like people telling them, "Hey, it could possibly grow more and more with time. Just leave it in. Don't touch your investment." People do it all the time. Esau was no different than, I think, how we as humans are from time to time. Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Now this is final. This is a promise between the two brothers. There's no undoing this. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. That is to say, Esau treated his birthright as worthless. It had no meaning. It didn't hold value to him. Jacob recognized the value of the birthright. Notice how Esau is. He eats his food really quickly, and then he gets up and he leaves. Esau seems to be a man that lives in the moment. He seems to be a man that doesn't really want to be pushed. He wants to be very comfortable in life and is willing to do whatever it takes in order to be comfortable. This is a good place to stop. I thought we would get farther along than we did, but we'll pick back up here next week. Can't wait to see everybody Sunday. God bless.